house held its breath as midnight settled, and the storm that never arrived pressed a hush against the windows. The third-person voice watched Lisa lie rigid, clutching the sheet like a tourniquet. Lisa said, "It's just noise," and the mattress dipped near her calves as if a careful knee tested the spring. Air thinned, and a chill moved from the baseboard to her throat. Nate had told her that stress makes shadows bold, but the room felt newly built around her terror. The lamp's chain brushed porcelain with a shy click, and that whisper of metal sounded like a dare. Lisa said, "If you're nothing, be nothing," and pulled the cord. Light struck the room, and the dent in the sheet smoothed as though a breath exhaled. The third-person voice measured the silence for an aftershock, and found only the small tick of the wall clock. A framed photo tilted without falling. The scent of damp earth seeped from the mattress seams, old and tender as a garden after rain. Lisa said, "I heard you," though no echo returned. The hallway beyond the door cupped a darker dark, and the vent murmured a vowel that never formed a word. The lamp flickered once, not failing, only blinking. Something had learned the bed's language and spoke it fluently. She switched off the light and waited for the weight to return, and it did, patient, rehearsed, and closer. Morning arrived without apology, and the third-person voice watched Lisa study the blank bed as if it might confess. Steam lifted from her mug like a thought she could not hold. Nate said, "Sleep paralysis explains everything," while he scrolled weather that never rained. The room smelled like detergent and old thunder. Lisa said, "Paralysis doesn't tilt frames," and traced a finger along the wall where the nail had loosened. A faint crescent on her ankle darkened like a bruise remembering its origin. Nate said, "You scratched yourself with the softness people reserve for flimsy truths." The hallway wore yesterday's cold, and the vent gave only a tired sigh. The third-person voice counted the small betrayals people make with hope and found them abundant. Lisa said, "I heard it breathe," and the words felt heavier once spoken. Nate kissed her temple, then avoided looking at the mattress. They ate toast like it was a task. The clock clicked noon with a grin that showed too many teeth. Lisa said, "Tonight, I'll keep the light on," and placed the lamp chain across the base like a tripwire. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and refused to explain why. The house took a long, slow breath as afternoon thinned, and the air tasted faintly of damp earth again. Denial gathered its notes and tried to sing, but the melody would not stick. The third-person voice hovered as Lisa rolled her sock and found crescent scratches arranged like a careful signature. She said it learned to write, half a joke, half an oath. In the mirror, the room gathered behind her like witnesses who never speak. "Oh," Nate said, "you kicked the frame," kneeling to inspect the bed leg he had tightened last month. The leg sat straight as a moral no one keeps. The air tasted metallic, a coin on the tongue. Lisa said, "I want proof," and set a baby monitor with an infrared eye on the nightstand. The lens stared at the sheets like a guard who hates his post. She taped a thread across the mattress seam, a fine red line that wagged in the draft. The hallway hummed with refrigerator noise and nerves. Nate said, "You will see nothing," but his voice reached for certainty and came back with lint. Sunset slipped into the room with copper hands and touched the picture frame, which did not move. The third-person voice counted heartbeats as if they were evidence bags. Lisa said, "If it wants me, it can face the light," and clicked the lamp on, then off, then on again to set a rhythm. A storm promised by forecasts decided to remain a rumor. Night perched on the sill and waited for a cue. Night came polite and ruthless, and the third-person voice followed Lisa to the threshold where all bravado ends. The lamp cast a tidy circle that looked safe until it wasn't. The hallway held its darker opinion. Lisa said, "I won't run," and lay down with her knees relaxed like a bribe. The baby monitor glowed an insect green. The red thread waited like a witness who would not be swayed. The vent coughed once, then fell into a careful silence. Nate said, "Text me if anything happens," and stood there longer than a joke allows. He left the door ajar as if that gap could argue with the dark. The sheet touched her shin with a polite knuckle. Lisa said, "Not tonight," and placed her palm flat over the seam. Her pulse beat against cotton as steady as a metronome. Minutes stretched like gum. The clock mocked them with a cruel patience. A whisper rose from the mattress, not a voice, only the shape of one trying to gather. The third-person voice refused to give it a name. Down the block, a siren rehearsed despair and moved on. The lamp buzzed, then steadied as if ashamed. Lisa said, "I am awake," and the bed dipped near her hips, as gentle as a caregiver and as wrong as a locked door opening by itself. Dawn crept thin and sickly, and the third-person voice watched Lisa carry a small memorial box to the bed like an apology. The lid sighed. Inside lay a charm necklace, a folded photo, and a voicemail icon she never opened. Lisa said, "Emily, I kept the wrong promises," and the room leaned closer as if to hear better. The mattress felt warmer where the weight had been. Nate said, "You need rest," from the doorway, voice smaller than morning. She nodded without agreement. Dust traced sunbeams like signatures. The photo showed two smiles unharmed by knowledge. The charm clicked against her nail like a tiny metronome marking debts. The house exhaled a smell of soil after rain. Lisa said, "I'll listen tonight," meaning the old message and the new intruder. The baby monitor sat dark, unblinking and faithful. The red thread lay unbroken, but the seam it guarded looked amused. The third-person voice gathered the pieces of guilt and saw a path shaped like a bed. Outside, a delivery truck stalled, coughed, and moved on. The sound like a promise refusing to fail. Lisa replaced the lid and rested her hand on the wood. The air cooled as if a window had opened where no window lived. She said, "I won't be alone," and the empty hallway disagreed without speaking. Night returned like a rehearsal that remembered every cue, and the third-person voice found Lisa rigid with intention. The lamp glowed, and the red thread lay exact across the seam. Lisa said, "You can press, but I will not flinch." The mattress complied with a careful kneel near her calves. Air cooled in a narrow path along her shin, as if breathed by a mouth too patient to need lungs. Nate had promised to stay awake across the hall, but the house kept his promises softly and out of sight. The clock smirked at 1:12 and waited. Lisa said, "I am listening," and the bed answered with a long, slow exhale that belonged to no body. The third-person voice tracked the dent as it deepened and relaxed, attired with the manners of a thief. The lamp blinked once and steadied, apologizing for the blink without words. The vent whispered a vowel that died young. Lisa said, "You only live where I sleep," and the seam tugged the thread just enough to prove it heard. She pressed her palm flat and felt a pulse that was not hers. She counted to 50 and never reached calm. The night did not argue. It merely kept its hands on the bed and learned the rhythm of her breath. Morning unwrapped the room without grace, and the third-person voice watched denial set the table. "Nate," said Ramatonia, "explains the weight," while he scrolled through articles that blessed him with certainty. Lisa held up the photo frame whose tilt had persisted through logic. She said, "Your science does not straighten this." The crescent marks on her ankle had ripened into testimony. Nate said, "You scratched them in your sleep," and tried to smile as if the world were obedient. The red thread across the mattress lay unbroken, but the knot looked tired. Coffee steamed like a small storm that meant nothing. Lisa said, "The dent smoothed when I turned on the light, and even the mug cooled hearing that." The third-person voice noticed how silence nests in kitchen corners and breeds doubt. Outside, a leaf blower imitated chaos with no conviction. Nate touched her shoulder and left his hand there too long to be casual. He said, "Let me set the camera better tonight." Hope arrived, thin as paper, and waited for a pen. The third-person voice oversaw their upgrades as if staging a confession booth. Nate mounted the IR camera on a mini tripod, aimed squarely at the seam. He said, "We want coverage without shadows, measuring angles with a carpenter's patience." Lisa taped a fresh line across the seam, double-knotted, a little defiant. She said, "If it moves, we will see it," and her voice sounded like a contract signed in the margins. The lamp bulb was replaced with a new filament that hummed a calmer note. The clock watched without blinking. Nate said audio too, and placed a recorder near the bed leg that never creaked. The hallway yielded a draft that hesitated at the threshold. Lisa set her phone to airplane and placed it face down as if blinding a witness. The room settled into a surveillance stillness that made simple breathing feel like trespass. The third-person voice counted cables and intentions and found both neat. Sunset wrote copper along the baseboard. Lisa said, "If it's real, it will not fear an audience." The bed, being furniture and something else, withheld its answer until night. Records do not haunt, people do. And the third-person voice followed Lisa to the landlord's office that smelled like key metal and dust. Mr. Harlan said, "Previous tenant left abruptly," while he rifled folders that remembered better. Lisa said, "Did she complain about the bedroom?" and watched his eyes skip a line. He said, "Noise through vents, odd drafts, nothing formal," though his voice carried a margin note. The lease dates overlapped a winter she wanted to forget. A photocopy showed Emily's name in a corner like a bruise. Lisa said, "Keep my copy," and slid the paper into her bag with hands that did not tremble. Outside, the street reflected a sky that refused weather. Third-person voice measured how truth prefers plain rooms and good lighting. Mr. Harlan said, "Call if anything structural," and looked relieved to sell a smaller world. Lisa walked home on a sidewalk that counted steps and memories. The house met her at the door with a draft that knew her by name. Night clicked into place like a lock choosing sides, and a third-person voice watched the plan perform. The camera's red diode pledged its witness. The recorder blinked a patient green. Lisa said, "No prayers, only data," and lay as still as a sentence with no comma. Minutes arranged themselves into a quiet that felt curated. Then the sheet near the seam twitched once, twice, and drew inward as if pinched. The red thread bowed and held. The lamp dimmed a breath and brightened as if asked a question. Lisa said, "Are you learning me?" And the bed answered by pulling the sheet an inch toward the hollow. She turned on the lamp. The sheet smoothed in a hiss of cotton and gilt. The third-person voice marked the time. Later, playback showed the tug clearly, unkind to denial. Nate said, "Okay," but the word arrived smaller than surrender and larger than doubt. The house listened to them, listening to it, and learned their names again. Morning dared confidence, and the third-person voice watched Lisa drag the bed 6 inches from its old indent, as if moving a border on a map. She said, "New rules," and pressed tape X's on the floor where the legs would live. Nate measured distances like a truce broker. The wall wore a shallow scrape, the color of tired bone. Afternoon slid across paint with a calm that did not belong. Lisa lay down for a test and felt the old pressure ghost her ankle, even from the new spot. She said, "You followed," and the word found no place to echo. She rolled away, then back, and the invisible knee mapped her calves with polite invasion. The third-person voice took note of cartography without kindness. Nate said, "Maybe vibration," but his certainty had grown porous. The clock failed to gloat. The house learned the new coordinates faster than people did. Lisa stood and stared at the empty space the bed had left, which now looked crowded by something she could not see. The third-person voice introduced Dr. Miriam Cole, as if opening a locked drawer. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Some things learn a route, not a room," while her eyes traced the seam and the taped floor marks. She moved gently, a librarian among volatile texts. Lisa said, "It knows my breathing," and did not blink. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "It knows your grief," with a softness that did not apologize. She examined the bed slats and found shallow scores that looked like prayers scratched by someone who had run out of words. The lamp flickered as if pleased by an audience that could parse nuance. Nate hovered in the doorway collecting objections he would not spend yet. Dr. Miriam Cole said, You invited nothing, but something answered anyway. The house shifted its weight on old joists and decided to listen. Explanation has gravity, and the third-person voice felt the room bend when Dr. Miriam Cole spoke of invitations made by absence. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "A bed is a threshold if longing outlives sleep," and the bulbs shivered to punctuate the line. The lamp brightened, dimmed, then settled like a breath you decide to keep. Lisa said, "Can we close it?" and the question missed its mark by a hair. Dr. Miriam Cole said not yet, and touched the red thread as if greeting a witness. The vent emitted a low vowel that somehow contained her name. Nate said, "That's air," but the word failed to wear its lab coat. The walls held their paint carefully, like skin bracing for a needle. The clock ticked in a tempo that felt chosen. Knowledge made the quiet heavier, and it did not fall. The house chose its moment, and the third-person voice recorded the exactness. Nate stepped closer to the vent as if to win a bet with physics. The grill breathed his childhood nickname with a warmth that did not belong to air. Nate said, "No one calls me that," and took a step back that measured time as much as distance. Lisa said, "It learns fast," and felt the mattress edge cool under her fingers. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "It was listening while we named it nothing," and her eyes did not leave the seam. The lamp steadied as if deciding to be brave. The hallway exhaled the scent of rain that never fell. Nate opened his mouth for a new explanation and found none willing to work. Silence arrived like a verdict and sat down on all their shoulders. Lines get drawn to be crossed, and the third-person voice watched Lisa pour a ring of salt that looked brave until morning. She said, "Stay out," and the granules shone like a cheap constellation. Night approved without comment. Hours later, Dawn found the salt lines smudged where something soft had dragged through. Footprints did not appear, only the idea of them, printed as disturbances too careful to own weight. The red thread lay straight, but the knot wore a new looseness that felt like humor. Nate said, "You did this in your sleep," and even he did not believe the line. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "It prefers agreements to bars," and brushed the smudge with a pen cap. Lisa said, "Then I will stop agreeing," and closed the window that memory kept open. The bed, polite as always, waited for night to resume the conversation. Lisa carried her phone to the bed as if it were a key, and the third-person voice watched her press play on the old voicemail. Static breathed first, then Emily's hush moved like a hand through dark water. Emily said, "Stay where the bed can see you," and the room tilted. The mattress warmed along the seam, as if remembering. Lisa said, "I should have answered," and every dust mote paused. The clock's second hand slipped with a careful courtesy. The voice on the recording fractured, reformed, and shaped an unfinished plea. Emily said, "I left it something to guard you," and the lamp flickered like a blink. The floorboard answered with a soft complaint. Lisa said, "Guard me from what?" and her throat closed on the last word. The third-person voice kept time with the static and found sorrow hiding inside the hiss. The message ended in a swallowed breath that felt like a promise running out of road. The third-person voice followed Lisa as she stripped the bed with reverence and dread. Sheets folded back like lids. The mattress seemed tugged at her wrist as if requesting patience. Lisa said no more hiding, and slid her hand beneath. Her fingers found the charm necklace cool as moon water. The metal clicked against the frame with a small verdict. Emily's scent of citrus rose like a season misfiled. Lisa said, "You were here," and the mattress settled a fraction lower. The red thread fluttered at her breath, then stilled. Shadows gathered at the footboard with courtly manners. The clock watched like a bored judge. The third-person voice noted the way objects confess when no one argues with them. Lisa closed her fist around the charm and did not let go. Confessions prefer small rooms, and the third-person voice listened as Nate hovered by the door. Lisa said, "Emily slept here while I was away, and the bed seemed to hear its own history." Nate said, "One night only," and the lie tried to wear a gentle face. The charm shone like an answer begging for the right question. Lisa said, "You knew and told me nothing," and the lamp steadied as if bracing. Nate said, "I thought it would fade," and the words hit the floor without bounce. The air thinned near the seam, a tide pulling at ankles that were not in water. Silence untied the knot on the red thread a fraction, then reconsidered. The third-person voice measured the gap between fear and explanation. Lisa said, "It learned us while we ignored it, and the house agreed by doing nothing." Dr. Miriam Cole arrived with the calm of a locked file opening itself. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Some guardians charge interest," and examined the frame with scholar's patience. The lamp brightened as if trying to be understood. Lisa said, "Emily asked for help," and the mattress gave a breath that did not require lungs. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "A bargain needs a border, or it eats the room," tracing faint cuts in the slats. The marks looked like sentences scratched with a dull nail. Nate said, "End it," but the plea wore thin clothes. Dust lifted and settled on cue. The third-person voice felt the house lean closer to hear. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "First we find where it was welcomed," and set a small mirror against the seam. The mirror fogged in a single oval, then cleared like a decision. The third-person voice watched Dr. Miriam Cole lift the mattress and reveal the slats like ribs. Each strip bore shallow scoring in neat intervals. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "An altar made by desperation," and the room cooled a degree. Lisa said, "She meant to keep me safe," and the charm bit her palm. The vent exhaled a soft syllable that refused to be language. Nate stepped back and found the wall already there. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Safety without consent invites hunger," and placed chalk dots along the cuts. The lamp's filament sang a thin note. The red thread vibrated once and went still. The third-person voice counted the dots and mapped a circle where a bed pretended to be a door. Lisa said, "Then we will close it," and the house remembered how to listen. Truth arrived sideways, and the third-person voice carried it into the room. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Emily asked anything to watch over you," and the slats seemed to nod. Lisa said, "She was alone when I wasn't," and the charm swung like a pendulum judging time. The mirror fogged again, small and intimate. Emily's voicemail breathed in memory like a tide returning to claim its shells. Nate said, "She wanted good," and the phrase felt too light to weigh the room. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Good can borrow teeth," and tapped the chalk ring. The bed answered with a polite settling, as if pleased to be recognized. The third-person voice marked the place where love became leverage. Lisa said, "I forgive her," and the lamp steadied. Forgiveness did not empty the air. Prices prefer to be paid late, and the third-person voice heard the debt collector in the seams. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "It bound to the place you sleep, not to Emily," and the chalk looked older. Lisa said, "So it has my hours," and the bed flexed a breath under her palm. The recorder caught nothing and everything. Nate said, "We moved the bed again, but the floor had already learned the new math." Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Distance is not a cure when a threshold is portable." The vent whispered a syllable shaped like Lisa's name and swallowed it. The lamp's filament throbbed, unburned, but burdened. Lisa said, "Then we starve it," and the house tried to understand hunger. Evidence loves echoes, and the third-person voice cued the playback. The neighbor's outdoor camera laughed in monochrome. On screen, the night held breath as a distant scream rose and carried a single word. The word was Lisa, stretched thin as wire. Nate said that could be wind, and the excuse trembled. Lisa said, "That was me, but not from my mouth," and the bed cooled beneath her like a stone path after rain. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "It learns the names it keeps," and the audio clipped with shy distortion. The charm rang against her thumb once, like a bell that forgot the church. Silence returned to the screen and refused to apologize. The room listened very hard and learned nothing safe. The third-person voice watched shame sharpen its tools. Lisa said, "Your denial fed it," and the words sat between them like cut glass. Nate said, I thought facts were food, and the bed creaked as if amused. Dr. Miriam Cole said, isolation fattens what lives in thresholds, and traced the chalk circle again. The lamp dimmed and revived, polite as a nod. Nate said, I am here now, and the room weighed the sentence. Lisa said, stay until morning, and the seam twitched approval. The clock lost a minute, and refused to admit it. The house settled as if accepting a wager. The third-person voice placed the blame on the table, and left it there. Riddles are keys shaped like questions, and the third-person voice held its breath as Dr. Miriam Cole spoke. Dr. Miriam Cole said, to unmake a threshold, sleep where you do not dare, and the air changed temperature. Lisa said on the bare floor, and the bed answered with a soft protest. Nate said, we flip the frame and break the grammar, and the lamp agreed with a steadier glow. The chalk ring waited like a stage. Dr. Miriam Cole said, we cut the ties, not the wood, and set out red thread as if it were a scalpel. The vent stilled to listen. Lisa said tonight, and the house drew its silence close, attentive as a witness. Plans settled into the room like tools in a tray. The third-person voice watched Lisa lay the past out like tools, and the room answered with a hush that felt rehearsed. Dr. Miriam Cole said, memory is the first cut, while her hands traced the chalk ring. Nate said, tell me what to do, and the plea tried to be sturdy. Lisa opened Emily's memorial box and set the charm beside the red thread as if pairing wounds. The lamp hummed, then steadied into a patient amber. Lisa said, I loved her and left her alone, and the bed lowered a breath that was not breath. Dr. Miriam Cole said, you will lie where sleep cannot find you, and pointed to the bare floor. Nate said, I will keep the camera on you, and the doorframe accepted him like a nervous friend. The house listened with old joists and careful lungs. The chalk dots glowed pale as moth wings. The third-person voice felt resolve arrive, thin and bright as a blade that never slips. The third-person voice mocked each preparation as if notarizing danger. Dr. Miriam Cole said, flip the frame, and Nate levered the mattress until the slats showed their scored grammar. Lisa stitched the sheet hem to hem with red thread, needles flashing like quiet lightning. She said, no openings left, and tied a surgeon's knot that respected fear. The camera found its angle and blinked a red promise. Dr. Miriam Cole said, we loosen, not banish, and set a bowl of salt at the footboard like a modest prayer. Nate said on 3, though no counting followed. The vent exhaled a pet name that did not belong to daylight. The lamp brightened, as if a witness raised a hand. The third-person voice felt the house narrow down to bed, thread and breath, and knew the room had learned their names by heart. The third-person voice watched courage minimize itself into posture and breath. Lisa said, I am bait, and lay on the bare floor inside the chalk ring, head toward the seam as if reading a dangerous book. Nate said, I'm here, and set the timer on the recorder with careful thumbs. Dr. Miriam Cole said, count your breaths backward, and the numbers softened her pulse into smaller animals. The lamp flickered, then held. The baby monitor painted everything in unmoving green. The sheet on the gutted frame rustled without wind, like a mouth practicing a word. Lisa said, I hear you, and the floor cooled at her shoulder. Something settled in the space above her, patient and exact, and learned the pace of her lungs without asking permission. The chalk at her temple did not smudge. The room pressed closer in polite increments, and the night took notes. The third-person voice felt the weight arrive, the way thunder arrives when everyone pretends it won't. The stripped bed frame groaned as the sheet tightened like a belt around nothing. Lisa said, not the bed, me, and the air obeyed halfway. A pressure lowered over her ribs like a patient hand, careful and possessive. Nate said now, and the camera's red eye woke brighter. Dr. Miriam Cole said, name what you are not. And Lisa said, I am not your doorway, with a voice she recognized and didn't. The vent formed a vowel that tried to become her name and failed politely. The chalk ring trembled in one small arc, then held its line like a promise that learned to keep itself. The lamp steadied, choosing to be brave. The house leaned toward them and forgot to creak. The third-person voice recorded the seam cracking without sound. A hairline fissure walked the plaster from headboard to ceiling like a drawn breath becoming visible. Lisa said, "Give her back her watch," and the charm on the floor rang once like a coin. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Cut the ties," and lifted the red thread where it bridged knot to knot. Nate said, "Here," and steadied the lamp as if light were a tool with edges. Lisa snipped 3 places, and the sheet slackened, disappointed. The pressure released not outward, but upward, a polite departure that refused to admit defeat. The fissure widened to the width of a page and stopped when looked at. The house exhaled a cool draft from nowhere. The third-person voice knew a door when it failed to be one, and the night agreed in silence. The third-person voice met the moment with both hands open. The bed frame heaved as if remembering oceans. The sheet sucked inward and found nothing to keep. Lisa said, "Emily, I heard you," and the pressure returned in a last insistent embrace at her sternum. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Debts named are debts cut," and began the severance in a voice like steady rain. Nate said, with her, not instead of her, and shifted the lamp to erase shadows under the slats. The charm rang twice and lay quiet. The vent tried again and made only weather. Lisa said, "I forgive you," and the weight shivered, unsure whether forgiveness is food. The chalk brightened as dust caught the light. The house stopped, pretending to be ordinary. The third-person voice felt the balance change, and the room waited to see who would leave with it. The third-person voice counted each cut like a bell. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "By the hours borrowed and the breaths taken, I sever you from this sleeper," and pulled the red thread free of the last stitch. The sheet softened into ordinary cotton. Lisa said, "Leave what is mine," and the floor warmed under her palm. The fissure in the wall narrowed, as if reconsidering. Nate said, "Almost there," and his voice found shape it had never used. The lamp did not blink. The vent gave up language and returned to air. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "You are not invited," and the bed frame fell still in a relief that sounded like grief. The house remembered the shape of quiet and wore it with care. The third-person voice measured cost the way a body does when it tries to stand. Lisa sat up slowly, and the room kept its distance. She said, "I trade sleep for living," and the words felt signed in bone. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Insomnia can be a lock," and closed the memorial box with a soft seal. Nate said, "We won," then softened. "We ended this part as if correcting history before it wrote itself." The lamp cooled to a steady hush. The chalk ring scuffed where Lisa's heel brushed it, and nothing answered. The vent breathed only house breath, plain as laundry. The bed frame looked like furniture again, which felt suspicious. The third-person voice shaded the ledger and left space for a future entry no one wanted to write. Third-person voice watched them do ordinary things with ceremonial care. Nate said, "We take it to the curb," and together they muscled the mattress through a hallway that felt narrower than yesterday. Lisa said, "No keepsakes inside," and checked the seam with 2 quick fingers. Dr. Miriam Cole said, "Let it be collected by something that does not know your name," and held the door like a witness. The sky was clean and undecided. The street sounded like errands and dogs. The mattress rode on their shoulders like a stubborn idea, finally leaving. The house, briefly lighter, did not celebrate. The lamp blinked once and pretended it was the sun. The third-person voice stayed to hear the last sentence. A moving truck strapped the mattress under plastic that sighed. The driver checked mirrors and drove. Dashcam audio later held a whisper that moved under the road noise like a thought with teeth. It said, "Make room," and the plastic sagged inward as if cradling a knee. Lisa stood at the curb with Nate and did not blink. Nate said, "It's gone," and the day pretended to agree. Dr. Miriam Cole said, Call me if the floor dreams, and left with a paper map of their quiet. The house breathed. The bed frame was still inside, empty and patient. The third-person voice closed the scene and left the page open.